I've been thinking about bodily intelligence, the intelligence of the body. What we mean when we talk about a bodily intelligence, and how this might be distinguished from what we normally associate with intelligence. What could be called the intelligence of the mind. The intelligence of the mind, it's what we normally recognize as intelligence. So we don't need to believe the mind-body Cartesian dualism. You know, if you're saying, no, we can't talk about bodily intelligence because that repeats the Cartesian dualism, that's not true. Because the Cartesian dualism does not grant intelligence to the body. So we can talk about the mind and the body while still allowing for any number of ontological commitments, whether you're a substance monist who believes that everything is part of one substance, or substance dualist, or a dual aspect substance monist, someone who believes that it's all one thing but there are two aspects to it. I mean, looking at contemporary divergences and disagreements in the ontological worldviews of contemporary scientists across many areas of science, from quantum physics to astrophysics, neuroscience, you know, across the sciences, there are a vast, wide divergence of ontological commitments or presuppositions or assumptions, beliefs. You know, if you believe that there's dark matter and or dark energy that's distinct from the atomic world that we live in, you know, the world of the atomics and subatomic stuff that we can measure. If you believe that, then you are basically either a dualist or a dual aspect monist. There has to be some dualism in there because you're saying something is measurable and something isn't. Or that we can measure its effects, but we can't measure it directly. We can't measure the place that we're accustomed to measuring things. So, whatever the case may be, I think bodily intelligence is something that is measurable because it is something that comes from within the body, and I think that scientists are able to measure, for instance, activity of, you know, things that, like neural networks in the solar plexus, for instance, that show a lot of what we would call neural activity, and you know, there's been a lot of talk of these different intelligences, these different systems in the body. You know, the body has its own kind of, if you go into water, your hands and your feet become pruny. And this pruny thing is not just a defect, it's actually something that we acquired. It was a mutation whereby we, as humans, acquired the ability to better grip things in water. And then we leave the water and our hands go back, you know, hands and feet are no longer pruny because the body is intelligent enough to adapt. But that might be something more like an unconscious intelligence, something that we couldn't really ask questions to. We couldn't really touch with. And, what does it mean to get in touch with bodily intelligence? What does it mean to ask a question to your bodily intelligence, or to grapple with something and to resolve it through bodily intelligence? So, I think for this, there's really a different idea. And what I'm kind of wondering about now is the relationship of the trance state, the hypnotic state, to tapping into bodily intelligence. And also acting, and actors, and what actors do, and delivery, tone of voice, pacing, becoming aware of the presence of the room, becoming aware of, even just breathing, eye contact, being still. All of these things, it's complicated because, a little background, what kind of got me thinking about this is I became very interested in the human design system as put forth by Ra Uru Hu, born Richard Krakauer. And the human design system has there are a number of videos of Ra and other commentators, but especially him, describing this system. And I just, I think it's the bee's knees, and I find it really incredible. But I sent some videos of Ra to some friends of mine, and some friends thought I was like, some friends, there was a wide variety of reactions, but one friend in particular expressed the opinion he couldn't stand Ra's voice or his way of presenting information in the videos. And a few people have made comments about it. And what I recognized when I saw Ra was that, he was a really good speaker that was really in touch with something, that same kind of thing that actors are in touch with, which is this bodily intelligence, what I'm calling a bodily intelligence, or a second sense, or an awareness that kind of an unconscious awareness, or like tapping into your body's awareness, or just becoming more present. There was a book I read years ago that talked about how actors would, I think it was called Second Sense, actors going into this second sense before a scene or something where they kind of get in touch with. Everyone has their routine. Musicians do it. Musicians have warm-ups or pre-show rituals. So there's, and there's all this idea of flow states and things like that. I don't know if it's identical to any of that. A lot of times the flow state or the meditative state or these kind of states will have full brain activity. And this might actually just be very specific use of just a few parts of the brain. I'm not really sure. My original thinking about what this second sense is, or going into this other sense, was really approached through Myers-Briggs typology and through Jungian personality typology, and that is all based around the idea of the inferior function being the pathway for growth or individuation of any personality type. So whatever your dominant function is, with its function and attitude, it's either going to be thinking or feeling, or it's going to be sensing or intuition, one of these four, and then you'll either be an extrovert or an introvert at that dominant function level. And whatever the case may be, you're going to have an opposite inferior function. So if you're introverted sensing, you're going to have inferior extroverted intuition. So if you're extroverted thinking, you're going to have inferior introverted feeling. And these all work in this oppositional way where you have an Achilles heel. And so my original thinking was that when you go into the second sense, it's not that you're going into a flow state with the full brain operating in some kind of Zen state. No, each personality type already does that. Everyone does that when they're doing things they're really good at. No matter what your personality type, there's certain things you can go into that state. But each personality type does that. The introverted intuitive dominant will go into that kind of full brain Zen state, especially when they're doing novel tasks and kind of learning something new, and when they have to absorb a lot of information and synthesize it. So basically, and this is research from Neuroscience of Personality by Dario Nardi. Dario Nardi is the cognitive social neuroscience researcher using Jungian and Myers-Briggs and other modalities. And just really brilliant, one of my favorite contemporary researchers, writers, scientists, and studying psychology as well, human psychology, human personality. Fascinating, really fascinating work. And so showing how each type, and some types have really unique patterns, like the extrovert intuitive dominant. Think of like Robin Williams when he's riffing, it's the brainstorm pattern, it's a Christmas tree pattern. The extrovert sensing dominant can kind of lock on and wait to respond. And so as soon as something happens, they can respond. So like in sports, like hit the ball back as soon as it comes, or in conversation, wait, and as soon as the person stops talking, say something short in response to the last thing they just said in real time. Very quick, very, very quick. And so you can go back and forth and have these really quick, conversations. They're just like passing the ball back and forth, like a bartender. A lot of bartenders are extroverted sensing dominant. So anyway, the idea is just that these, so my first approach was that it's always the inferior function, that it's not the whole brain state. These are all whole brain states that I'm talking about, flow states. And what I originally thought is when you're getting in touch with this bodily intelligence, when you're getting in touch with this fundamentally, and I think this is still my stance. I've had a few changes of perspective or kind of shifts in thinking about it since learning more human design. But before I was really exposed to human design or knew anything about it, I had heard of it, but I hadn't really learned that much about it. This would have been over the summer of 2016. I really kind of began theorizing a lot about this inferior function being the gateway to a different kind of sense that is this bodily sensing. And it's because in my case, I started feeling it. I started kind of realizing this might be what Jung is talking about with the slowing down of the dominant function. And that as we get older, the dominant function kind of slows down until the inferior function, we're able to wait enough time for it to emerge. So at a practical level, it would be if I kind of try to wake myself up, slap myself in the face, drink a little, cup of coffee, cold air, try to get hyped up. I go into my intuition and my thinking. I try to talk quickly like this, and I try to really, but then if I start slowing down, I eventually, because I'm an introverted intuitive dominant, I eventually end up in my extroverted sensing. Extroverted sensing. Extroverted sensing. It's a way of talking. It's a way of seeing. It's a way of looking. It's a way of. It's slower. It is slower, and everybody is slower when they go into their inferior function. And an extroverted sensing dominant who's usually so quick and so snappy with their extroverted sensing, when they go into their inferior introverted intuition, they might be very slow. And they might have to suss out things in a way that an intuitive might immediately click. might click. So in a way, I'm even attempting to demonstrate here this second sense, which can appear very all sorts of things, hypnotic, right? And so when I sent the human design material, which is also presented in a very slow, hypnotic sort of way, to my friend, he really didn't like it. My one friend especially found that he thought it was trying to manipulate him. And then I looked online, and he sent me some critiques of human design, and there's someone saying, "Oh, I recognize immediately that Ra is in a trance when he's doing these videos, and he's putting you into this other state, this other brain state. While you listen, you're being hypnotized, And you might say that even while I'm talking in this way, maybe I'm doing that. This was the way I was talking when I first began formulating the ideas that it was the inferior function. That it's the inferior function of the personality type that is this slow, bodily intelligence. In my case, I felt it very much like in Japan, they have this idea, hara. That's this belly. It's, if you trust somebody, you might say it's macho. You might say that it's a machismo. I think women have hara also, and perhaps in Japanese culture, with its male-dominated patriarchal business system, it is a little macho there. But I think we can still see that different cultures, different people, we're all aware, we all pick up on at some level when someone is talking from hara. Or when they're talking out of their neck, when they're talking out of their face, when they're talking out of their forehead, that there are different ranges. There are different ranges, right? And it can sound contrived. It can sound fake. And that's not hara. Don't say that hara can sound fake as much as we can sound fake if we're unable to achieve it, if we're trying to achieve it. And there is a need to move freely, to not be stuck in one function or the other. There's a flexibility. So me as an introvert intuitive dominant, I should be able to go into my intuition, and I should be able to go into my extroverted thinking and explain things. And I can't quite boot it up right now. There is a kind of booting up. There is a sort of cost of booting up the different functions that we don't fully notice. Usually we're on, we're up. But then once we've kind of relaxed, it's interesting. So the bodily intelligence is, in a way, it's a natural state. It's like calling me an intuitive dominant is funny because my natural state is sensing. My intuition is what defines me because I'm going against my natural state. I am the ability to contradict my programming. I am the ability to stand against my biological and my unconscious. One of the interesting things I got from human design is the idea that if you look at nature, you look at all the birds and all the animals and the insects and the plants, the trees, everything. It's all just programmed. It's just running its program. It's running its. It might be conscious in some sense, but it's panpsychists with their ontological commitments will be committed to the notion that there is a psyche in everything. And, I can even understand poetically, like the aesthetic of James Hillman, the aesthetic ideas of, like, kind of soul out there in the world and everything. And there's a certain romanticism of the animal, especially the mammal. But, I guess all I'm trying to say is that humans are the ones, Bergson had the idea that there's a gap, there's a zone of indetermination, that humans have become complex enough that we're the only life form on the planet right now that have widened this zone of indetermination enough that we've been able to do two things. This is how Bergson differentiates us from the other mammals. And even more differentiated in the same way that mammals are differentiated from cold-blooded animals and insects and so on. The human is able to do two things with our zone of indetermination, which is a way that we're able to relate to time differently. So instead of us being materially determined by time at a physical level, we use time in a different way to physically determine our outer reality. Meaning, we wield time, we make time, we orient ourselves. These two things that humans do. We suspend habitual reaction. We suspend whatever that habitual reaction is. You can see a dog try to do it. You say, don't eat that cupcake. So some animals, and Bergson makes room for this. He says, yeah, all animals to a degree, more or less, have some ability, some zone of indetermination. But it's humans that are complex enough to really be able to suspend habitual reaction. And the second thing, to appeal to past experience. And this idea of appealing doesn't just mean that we remember. It means we try to remember. And we try to forget. Animals remember. They have pattern recognition. Humans, it's not just that something gives us a stimulus that stimulates us to remember something, that stimulates us to recognize that pattern in the way that a dog might remember something if it recognizes something in a pattern. With the human, we try to remember. What was that? We try to forget. Right? This is us wielding time in a distinct way. So Bergson gives us this very nice image of the human. So as an intuitive, I would move flexibly through my functions into my extroverted thinking. Then if you follow the model A of socionics, I move into my introverted sensing. I become aware of my body. I move into my extroverted feeling, where I shift my tone of voice. My voice could go high, or it could go low. And then I settle in my extroverted sensing. This is kind of an interesting idea, that here is a conducive place for me. It's relaxing for me. Here in the cognitive function I'm using right now. Extroverted sensing. Here I can also access introverted feeling. I have a certain stillness, an emotional stillness. So there is a bodily intelligence to me that can be explained by going into extroverted sensing. And if I go further, I get pushed into extroverted intuition and introverted thinking. Extroverted intuition is known for being very sarcastic. If I become very sarcastic, it almost seems like I've overshot. I've gone into a place that might be bodily intelligence, but it might also be considered where I'm unconscious. I'm not fully able to wield that consciously. Just like in my extroverted sensing, I have to be careful, because my extroverted sensing makes me want to say things. I'll give a concrete example. When I was first going into this experience of being slower, my whole life I'd been accustomed to, whenever someone's talking, I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, totally, I agree, yep, or this kind of, this thing that I learned how to do, or if I was sitting, I would still be kind of nodding or trying to complete the sentence. I don't know what I was doing, it was. So when I first started going into this extrovert sensing, someone would be talking and I would think of something to say and I would say to myself, I just don't remember. I would think of something that would be like, oh, that's really good. And I'd be like, no, let it go. And I would just forget it. And something else would come and I'd forget it. Something else would come and I'd forget it. Something else would come and I'd forget it. And then I would just have nothing to say. And sometimes I would end up in a conversation where someone would say, well, and then I would just say whatever came to mind, you know. I was in a very slow state. And then I would speak and I would say something like, no. And just saying no sometimes. Or that's not true. Or I don't know about that. Or, and is that working? You know, I would say these kind of rude things. I would say very rude things. Someone would complain about something that's not working. I would say, how's that working for you? Or they would say something that they're so proud of themselves thinking it's working. It didn't seem like it was. It's very rude of me. I was being extremely rude, you know. One person was very sensitively heartbroken about a relationship. And, you know, usually I would be very sensitive to this. And she said, and, you know, he could stand me. He could stand me. He could stand to be with me. And she just looked at me like I was supposed to say something. I didn't have anything to say. I just stupidly, I'm learning not to do this. I said, no, he couldn't. She said, what? I said, well, where is he now? You know, it's the worst thing to say. She burst into tears. And we're not friends anymore. Someone else, you know, at that time had told me something that I said, well, you're a hypocrite. You know, they're saying really rude things. I mean, I was being just out of control because I was feeling this kind of, I mean, in a way it can be a power trip. You can call it an ego trip, but I felt like I had ego loss, rather. I felt like the ego was the thing that, you know, in a way it was nihilistic. I had come to this kind of weird, I don't know how to explain it. It was a phase where now I'm not always in it. I'm not always, you know, slower and paying attention to the moment, paying attention to the things in front of me, and paying attention to the things around me. And even now, I'm, you know, when you go into bodily intelligence, it only works, you know, if it's a give and take, you know. I'm feeling hungry, so I have to feed myself, and then my bodily intelligence will kind of rev up, and I'll be able to go into this feeling without pushing it, without trying to push to demonstrate, you know. I'm trying to show, talking with a lower tone of voice, thinking with a different pace. Not being afraid of silence, not being terrified of silence. Surrendering to a voice where, when you listen, you're no longer frustrated by all the silence and the pace, and you're no longer frustrated by waiting and thinking that you know what they're about to say, and thinking that you know, it's, when you talk like this, then it's making the listener listen in a way that requires a lot of patience. It just requires patience. You have to be very patient with me. You have to be very patient as a listener. And that patience can be, you might feel like you've been ripped off, like it's a waste of your time. What are you doing listening to this? Why is this person talking so slow? I don't know, you know. I can go into this mode. I can also rev up. I can rev up and I can talk in a fast way. You know, I'm not going to do that now. But I can do the normal thing. I mean, sometimes I can't not do that, if you get my drift. Sometimes I'm stuck in that. Sometimes I'm totally disconnected with no tether to an authentic, well, sacral response, the sacral or sacral. If you're into human design, then I have sacral definition, which makes me a generator. I have no throat definition, so I am a generator, yin. Without going into human design, I'll simply say that since learning about it, I have definitely changed my thoughts around bodily intelligence For instance, when I first thought, oh, it's my inferior function, I just thought, well, maybe everyone's inferior function is in their sacral region, so to speak, because I felt it without having the word for it. I was feeling this sacral energy. I was feeling this energy. People have problems with the term energy, like it's some new age thing. Okay, I was feeling what could poetically be called a new stirring of a new physical impulse within me. I felt I didn't flinch. I felt like I wouldn't flinch. Now I would flinch, Now I'm not even fully in there. I could really feel it when I was, maybe it was a trance state. That's the thing. Maybe it was a trance state. A friend would be talking to me and I would just be staring at them, making eye contact, and I wouldn't be reacting that much, And sometimes I would nod or I would show some reaction, but I wasn't reacting a lot. And people were kind of getting weirded out. So it is a slower state. It is a trance state, maybe, to a degree. Maybe you're not supposed to operate heavy machinery when you're in this cognitive state. I don't know. But going into this slower state felt then and feels now healing. Healing. But there's an anxiety that has to be burned off. There's an anxiety that prevents you from going fully into this state. Prevents me anyway. I shouldn't speak on your behalf because whoever's watching this, whoever's listening to this, may have a different experience. But my experience is that when I go into my relaxation, my inferior function, my sacral, I feel the anxiety. It doesn't let me fully relax. I need to detox it. I need to let it go. And with that, I will invite everyone to think, what does bodily intelligence mean to you? What is your bodily intelligence? How do you understand bodily intelligence? Whatever background you have, whatever frameworks or not, personal ideas, anything. How are you getting in touch with your bodily intelligence? Do you notice? Think about changes of tones of voice. Think about the tones of voice you use, how you answer questions. Or maybe it'll have nothing to do with this. This may be something unique to me or unique to my type, whether it's personality type or human design type, like generators. Maybe generators, the idea is that the voice is so important because of the sacral response. Maybe if you, or rather not the voice, but the vocalization of this, the verbalization of this. Fundamental acceptance and rejection responses. For you, it might be something different. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.